In recent times, the prices of feed ingredients that are used in making feed formulations for poultry, pigs, and other livestock have increased very much. Now, in addition to the high prices, some of these ingredients, especially the conventional ingredients, which are maize and soya beans, are less available due to the fact that we humans also consume these ingredients. Now, in combination, this problem of high prices and availability of feed ingredients have made the animal farming venture somewhat unattractive. As a matter of fact, most farmers that are already engaged in the business are quitting due to these same problems. However, there is a solution. There are alternative ingredients that can replace these expensive conventional ingredients in our animal feed formulations. Today, we are going to take one of the alternative ingredients, which is cassava meal, and we are going to look at how we can use cassava meal in our pig feed formulations. Cassava meal is mainly a source of carbohydrates or energy, and as such, it can replace our conventional ingredients, which is maize. We know that maize is usually the major source of energy in most feed formulations. Now, there are lots of conversations going on around cassava meal and how it can be used properly. So today we are going to have a whole conversation on how we can properly use cassava meal. Now, the key word here is properly. How we can properly use cassava meal to replace maize. So in our breakdown, we'll be comparing cassava meal and maize in terms of their nutritional content. Because like I always say, in order to replace one ingredient with another ingredient, you have to know their nutritional content and see whether they match or one is lesser than the other before you can do a proper replacement. Now, secondly, we'll also be looking at how to process cassava meal before use. Because unlike our maize, which is toxin-free, our cassava meal has toxins. It contains some cyanide. So we'll be looking at how to process cassava meal very well before giving to our pigs. And then last but not the least, we'll also be looking at the percentage or the amount of cassava meal that can replace maize in our feed formulations. So let's get right into it. So first, we are going to look at the nutritional contents of cassava meal and then look at that of maize. Now, I think this is something that you should know. For cassava, we can get 3 different feed types from it. So we have the cassava root meal, that is from the tubers. And then we have cassava peel meal, that is from the peels of the cassava. And then cassava leaf meal. Now, these 3 different types of cassava meal all have different nutritional content. So let's look at the nutritional content for the 3 of them. So for each of them, we'll be looking at their energy content, their crude protein content, and their crude fiber content. Now, for the energy contents that we'll be looking at, we wouldn't be looking at the gross energy. The gross energy is basically the total energy that is in that ingredient. We'll rather be looking at the metabolizable energy. Now, in simple terms, the metabolizable energy is the energy content that is actually used by the pig solely towards their growth. So let's create a table and look at the nutritional content of the ingredient. So we have our ingredients, we'll have our metabolizable energy content, our crude protein content, and our crude fiber content. Now note that these values were generated from several experiments, researches that have been conducted. And so let's look at them. So for cassava root meal, according to studies, it has a metabolizable energy content ranging between 3,300 to 3,700 kilocalories per kilogram, and a crude protein content ranging between 2 to 4%, giving an average of about 3.5%. And for its crude fiber content, it ranges between 5 to 10%, usually pegged at 5%. Now, for cassava peel meal, it has a metabolizable energy content ranging between 2,400 to 3,000 kilocalories per kilograms, and a crude protein content that ranges between 4 to 6%, an average of about 5%. It has a crude fiber content ranging between 10% to as high as 30%, and usually pegged at 10%. Now, for cassava leaf meal, it has a metabolizable energy content ranging between 2,000 to 2,500 kilocalories per kilograms, and it has a crude protein content that ranges between 17 to 30%, an average of about 21%, and their crude fiber content ranging between 15 to 30%, also pegged at 15%. Now, among these three cassava meals, the cassava root meal, cassava peel meal, and the cassava leaf meal, the one with the highest energy content is the cassava root meal. That is the whole cassava tuber, processing it and giving it to your pigs. That one has the highest energy compared to the cassava peel meal, which has a medium amount of energy. And then the cassava leaf meal has the lowest amount of energy, as you can see here. Now, the cassava leaf meal, although having the lowest amount of energy, has the highest amount of protein. As you can see, it has a protein content ranging between 17 to 30%, even as high as about 35%, an average of 21%. That's quite high amount of protein. But then when you look at the other two, the cassava peel meal and then the cassava root meal, they have very low amount of protein. So that's an advantage that the leaf meal has. So now, moving from the nutritional content of our cassava meal, let's look at the nutritional content of our maize. Now, maize, as you know, has a very high amount of energy. It has a metabolizable energy content ranging between about 3,900 to 4,000 kilocalories per kilograms. Now, maize has a crude protein content ranging between 8 to 12%, usually pegged at an average of about 8.25%. Now, in terms of fiber, maize has a crude fiber content ranging between 2 to 4%, usually pegged at an average of about 2.2%. Now, for the purpose of today's studies, we'll be taking cassava peel meal and comparing it to maize in terms of their nutritional content. Now, the essence of this comparison is to enable us do a better replacement. So we'll be able to see if the nutrients present in our cassava peel meal meets up with the nutrients in our maize. And if not, we'll know what to do to bring it up to par with maize. So now, in terms of their energy content, you realize that maize has a far higher metabolizable energy content compared to our cassava peel meal. Now, in terms of their crude protein content, maize has a higher crude protein content of about 8.25% compared to cassava peel meal, which has an average of about 5%. Now, in terms of the crude fiber content, maize has a lower crude fiber content, an average of 2.2% compared to cassava peel meal, which has a very high crude fiber content, ranging between about 10 to 30%. So now let's compare them in terms of their amino acid content. Both maize and cassava peel meal have low amount of amino acids. However, maize has a better amino acid content than cassava meal, especially in terms of methionine. Maize has a good amount of methionine, whilst cassava meal has very low amount of methionine. Now let's look at them in terms of their digestibility. These two ingredients are both readily digestible because they have high amounts of starch. Now, from this whole comparison that we just did, it is evident that our cassava peel meal has a poor nutrient profile as compared to maize. Now, aside this poor nutrient profile of our cassava peel meal, it has another downside. Generally, fresh cassava is toxic. What do I mean by fresh cassava is toxic? Now, cassava contains cyanogenic glycosides. Now, that is a big term. Let's break it down. Now, basically, cyanogenic glycosides are a group of plant toxins that release hydrogen cyanide when broken down. So in simple terms, we would say that cassava contains cyanide because when broken down, eventually the cyanide is going to come out, and that is going to worry our pigs, right? So we don't give fresh cassava to pigs. Now, if you can't give fresh cassava to pigs, how do we feed them to our pigs? Now, that brings us to processing of cassava peel meal. So we are going to look at how to process cassava peel meal to get high quality cassava peel meal. Now, we just don't want to get cassava peel meal, but we want to get it in the highest quality. Processing has to be done very well in order to obtain this high quality cassava meal. Properly processing your cassava meal will give you some benefits. Now, the first benefit is that it will help you remove a high amount of the cyanide from your cassava. If you don't process it well, you might get rid of some of the cyanide, but it won't be a high amount. So processing it properly, you get rid of a high amount of the cyanide. Also, when you properly process it, you increase the metabolizable energy present in the cassava meal. So these are the two major benefits: getting rid of the cyanide and then increasing the metabolizable energy of the feed. Because remember, we said our cassava peel meal has very low metabolizable energy, between 2,400 to 3,000, whilst our maize has 3,900 to 4,000, right? So then if you don't properly process your cassava meal to enhance or raise this energy content, it will not be able to replace maize very well. And do we want that? No. In as much as we want to use cassava meal to replace our maize, we don't want to lower the quality of our feed formulations, right? So we have to do proper processing so that we can get very high quality cassava peel meal. Now, there are two processing methods that can be used. So you can use any one that you prefer. So for the first method, this is what you are going to do. You take your cassava peels and you wash them very well. You can wash them about 2 to 3 times to get rid of any soil, any debris, anything that is unwanted from the peels. After washing, the next thing you have to do is to grind the peels. Now you have to grind it about 2 to 3 times, depending on the capacity of the machine you are using to grind. You grind it about 2 to 3 times in order to break the peels down into smaller particles very well. We want it to be in smaller particles. Do you get it? Now, after grinding, the next thing you do is to put them into sacks. So just like in processing of gari, you place them in sacks, you tie them up, and then you pack them on top of each other. And then you put something that will exert pressure on it. So you can put boards and then place huge blocks or stones on it just to squeeze out or to drain the water from the cassava peels that you've grinded. Now, at this stage, you leave it for about 3 to 5 days for it to ferment. Now, the fermentation process will get rid of the cyanide that is present in the peels. So leave it for 3 to 5 days for it to ferment. Now, after these 3 to 5 days, you realize that your cassava peels that you placed in the sack have lost most of the water present in it. And so it will cake up like compact material. So you take it and then you grind it again. Now we are grinding it in order to loosen it up so that we can dry. So once you grind it, the next thing to do is to spread it out on the sun for it to sun dry. So sun drying. Now the sun drying process is very beneficial because it's going to help you still remove cyanide from the peels. Because remember, in one of the previous videos, I mentioned that the ways by which you can remove cyanide from your cassava meal is by boiling, fermentation, and sun drying. So in this process, we've used fermentation and then we've used sun drying. So that means that we've gotten rid of much of the cyanide present in the peels. Now note that the fermentation process also increases the energy content of the peels. Do you get it? So this is the first method. So let's look at the second method that you can use in processing your cassava peels. Now for the second method, the first thing to do is still to wash your cassava peels to get rid of any unwanted soil or other material from it. Then you ferment the peels. The next thing to do is fermentation. So fermentation will reduce the cyanide content and also increase the energy content of the peels. Now you ferment for about 5 to 7 days. After fermentation, you take the peels out of the water. Do not use the water. That water now contains cyanide. So you have to get rid of the water. Please don't use the water. Don't give it to your pigs. Don't give it to chicken. Don't give it to any animals. Just get rid of that water. Now, after the fermentation process and getting rid of the water, the next thing to do is to dry the peels in the sun. Remember that this sun drying process will remove the remnant cyanide that is still present in the peels. Now, for the sun drying process, you have to make sure that the peels are well dried. So dry for about maybe say 3 to 5 days, depending on the intensity of the sun. If the sun is not that high, then you have to dry continuously till it gets very dried that you can easily hold it and break. Now at this point, the next thing to do is to grind your dry cassava peels. Then after grinding, you have your high quality cassava peel meal. So these two methods both incorporate the process of fermentation and sun drying, which helps to get rid of your cyanide. So at the end of using any of these two methods, you are going to obtain high quality cassava peel meal, which number one has very low amounts of cyanide to the point where it is no longer harmful to your pigs. And then number two has an increased energy content. So this is how you can process your cassava peel meal for your pigs. So now that we have successfully processed our cassava peels and we're having our cassava peel meal, how do we properly replace maize with our cassava peel meal in our pigs feed formulations? So now we know that replacing maize with cassava meal will lower the protein content of our feed. For this reason, we have to increase the protein content of our feed. So how do we do this? We can do this by introducing a new source of protein into the feed formulation, or you increase the kilograms of the protein ingredients that are already in the feed. So let me give an example. Let's say you have a feed formulation where you have maize, soya beans, wheat bran, and then PKC. Now you are taking out maize to bring in cassava meal. How do you boost the protein content of this formulation now? It's either you increase the kilograms of the soya beans in the feed, or you bring in a new source of protein like fish meal to be able to raise the protein content of the feed back to normal levels. Now let's look at the changes we have to make in terms of the fiber. We know that when you bring cassava meal to replace maize in your feed formulation, you are going to have a raised or a higher crude fiber content in your feed. So how do we tackle this issue? It's either you remove one fiber ingredient from your feed formulation. That is, if you have two fiber ingredients there, you take one out. Or you reduce the kilograms of the fiber ingredients that are present in your feed. Now, in terms of the amino acid content, you have to supplement your feed with amino acids, especially lysine and methionine. Because mind you, cassava meal is going to further lower the amino acid content of your feed formulation. So you have to supplement your feed with some amino acids. So now let's look at the energy content. In terms of the energy content, we know that when we bring cassava meal to replace our maize, our feed formulation is going to have a lowered energy content, because mind you that our cassava peel meal has a low energy content. And so then how do we preserve the energy content of our feed? We do not have to do a full replacement. Don't do 100% replacement of maize with cassava meal. So now how can we do a proper replacement? It is recommended that you do about 30 to 50% replacement of maize with cassava peel meal. And for this 30 to 50%, the replacement level is lower for our starter pigs as compared to our grower and finisher pigs. For starters, it is recommended that you do just 30% replacement, at most 35% replacement of maize with cassava meal. So in this case, let's say you have a feed formulation that has about 58 kilograms of maize. To do 30% replacement, that will be 30% of 58 kilograms, and that will give you about 17 kilograms. And then 35% will be 35% of 58 kilograms, and that will give you about 20%. So basically, in a starter feed that has 58 kilograms of maize, you can use 17 to 20 kilograms of cassava peel meal to replace some of the maize. So now in the end, your feed formulation can have about 38 kilograms of maize and 20 kilograms of cassava peel meal. Do you get it? Now for growers to finishers, you can do 40% to at most 50% replacement of maize with cassava meal. So in this case, if you have a grower or finisher feed formulation that has, say, 58 kilograms of maize, in this case, 40% of 58 kilograms will give us 23 kilograms. And then 50% of 58 kilograms will give us 30 kilograms. So that means that now in your grower or finisher feed formulation, which has 58 kilograms of maize, you can use about 23 to 30 kilograms of cassava meal to replace your maize. So now in the end, you can have a feed formulation that has about 30 kilograms of maize and 28 kilograms of cassava peel meal. And that would be a good formulation. It is important to know that after doing the replacement, that is not all. You have to make sure that you check if your feed formulation is still balanced. if it still meets the crude protein and the crude fiber requirements of your pigs, because that is very important. So by doing this, you end up with a feed formulation that is of high quality. So I've had people ask me if you can do a complete replacement, completely taking out maize and then replacing it with cassava meal. Say if you have 58 kilograms of maize, you take it all out and put 58 kilograms of cassava peel meal. For now, from all the findings and the experiments that have been done and the feed formulations that have been generated, it is not possible at this point. But then, trust you me, I'm still doing research into how we can do a full replacement to further lower the cost of our feed formulations. But for now, follow this 30 to 50% replacement levels. And so stay with me as we find out more ways to reduce the cost of our pig feed formulations. I'm looking at other sources of carbohydrates or energy that can equally replace maize, and probably that will be our next topic on this channel. And so for now, we are going to end here, and I'll see you again very soon. It's a bye for now. Bye bye.